Good evening, and a warm welcome to Unfiltered. My name is Ridi Klabi. Thank you for joining us. So, did President Cyril Ramaphosa reshuffle his cabinet, or as one online publication comically suggested, was this a cabinet reshuffle key? Was the appointment of Stella Ndabeni-Abrahams as the new Minister of Communications has been welcomed across the board? To fully understand these changes, we perhaps need to look at who did not get the chop. There were some loud gasps that compromised ministers whose legacy has been tarnished by poor management of their previous departments, who survived the reshuffle. New Environmental Affairs Minister Nomvula Mokonyane stands accused, you remember, of paralyzing her previous department, Water and Sanitation. To this day, the department is plagued by corruption, incompetence and maladministration. But the president thought she was the right person to lead environmental affairs. Let's come to Batabile Dlamini, the Minister of Women. Brought the social grant system to the brink of collapse. We know that, with the highest court in the land, the Constitutional Court, describing her as reckless and grossly negligent. It even recommended she be investigated for perjury, and perjury has to do with lies. Dlamini and Mokonyane are powerful senior members of the ANC-NEC and punched very hard in former President Jacob Zuma's corner. Would Ramaphosa have suffered politically if he had sacked them? Tonight on Unfiltered, we ask, was this a survivalist cabinet reshuffle where political consideration trumped the rule of law? Take a look at this.
President Ramaphosa has reshuffled his cabinet, combining 2 departments and moving 3 ministers and 1 deputy minister. Telecommunications and Postal Services Minister Siyabonga Cwele has been moved to Home Affairs, replacing Malusi Gigaba, who resigned last week. Minister Nomvula Mokonyane moved to Environmental Affairs, filling the portfolio left vacant by the passing of the late Minister Edna Molewa.
Minister of Communications will be Ms. Stella Ndabeni-Abrahams. Now, I've also decided to merge the Ministries of Communications and Telecommunications and Postal Services into a single ministry under the new Minister of Telecommunications and Communications, Minister Stella Ndabeni-Abrahams. This move is going to ensure that we have better alignment and coordination of matters that are critical to the future of our economy, particularly in the context of the 4th Industrial Revolution.
I, Stella Thembisa Ndabeni-Abrahams, swear that I will be faithful to the Republic of South Africa and will obey, respect and uphold the Constitution and all other laws of the Republic, and I undertake to hold my office as Minister with honor and dignity.
Ndabeni-Abrahams served as Deputy Minister of Telecommunications and Communications under former President Jacob Zuma. Ramaphosa also announced the stepping down of Deputy Minister of Energy Thembi Majola.
I wish to announce also the resignation from the National Executive of Deputy Minister of Energy Thembi Majola with effect from the 1st of January 2019 to attend to family commitments.
The merger of telecommunications and communications is the first wave in the restructuring process expected after next year's elections.
So my guests tonight are Lebohang Pheko, a senior research fellow at Trade Collective. And we also have Buyani Zwani, who's a senior lecturer at Gibbs. He's also the CEO of Breakthrough Development. And of course, later on, we will be joined by SANEF's Executive Director, Kate Skinner. Lots to talk to the media about. Welcome. Let me start with you, Lebohang. Was that a cabinet reshuffle? I actually watched South Africans just talking about it, building up. And I said, what is it with us that we get so excited? And then when nothing happens, we express disappointment. Where it was obviously clear that there weren't going to be any major announcements. At least I thought so. What did you think?
I thought it was going to be cosmetic at best, and it was exactly that. It was very cosmetic, very mild. It was, shuffle light. I mean, I think, some political scientists would probably argue that this can't be even defined as a shuffle per se, because it was really, number one, replacing one minister who had passed away, the late Mayor Molewa. It was then removing one minister, dealing with a minister who had been embroiled in some scandal, Mr. Gigaba. And then, it was very, very minuscule, really. And those would be, arguably just administrative shifts, barely worth a press conference, barely. But nonetheless, it was very cosmetic. But I mean, of course, reshuffle is about shuffling, shaking things about. I mean, let's talk about what is a reshuffle, shaking things around, shaking ideas around, bringing together.
So you wanted something a bit more than just announcing this one goes there, this one's go there. Yeah, it must communicate an idea, a vision.
Multiple visions. When you're reshuffling, you're thinking about multiple visions. You think about your local domestic policy, who's going to take it forward 5-10 years from now. You're thinking about your international relations, continuity. You're thinking about how you deal with different countries. You're thinking about all of those things. You're not just thinking about the here and the now.
Is Lebohang being fair to our president, Mr. Ramaphosa? That let's remember that this is a president who won at Nasrec with a slim majority, 179 votes. Right. And then he also has not contested an election because he's completing former President Jacob Zuma's term. So how much room really did he have to do all these big things that Lebohang is talking about?
Well, truthfully, he actually has got lots of room. And leadership really comes out at times like this. No one actually gets to be able to say that they did not win their own and this is a caretaker role, because he is continuing where the ANC as the ruling party is. So all that we're looking for at this point is for him to be decisive and get to a point of indicating next year, when you vote me in, I will have already steadied the ship and I have stabilized what needs to come through. Listen, I've just been able to garner more than 200 billion rand investment. That in itself should give people, should give him the backbone to be able to challenge things.
You think he's not exercising his leadership enough?
I think he has an opportunity to be able to be more decisive around this. He has an opportunity to be able to recluster things. And there are at least 3 cluster bodies that I would see needing attention right now.
Okay.
And
they don't have to wait until next year, until the elections next
absolutely
year?
Not.
Okay.
Absolutely
so the president speaks as if, he's somebody who is expecting to be the president of the Republic next year. He did indicate, as he was announcing his reshuffle, that, hey, there's a big thing happening next year. We will make the big changes next year. He stopped short of saying that, but that certainly was what he was implying. What do you make of that? That there's a taking for granted that we'll be here again next year and we'll do all these wonderful things that South Africans want.
So it's a buying time exercise. It's not an unfair assumption, but it's presumptuous. I think that when we think about leadership and the kind of leadership that my colleague has talked about, it's about being bold, and it's also about kind of distinguishing between whether you're leading a political party or you're leading a government, or you're leading a state, you're leading people. And I think that not only is this not just about mediating internal ANC dynamics and the Nasrec consensus, or the lack thereof, as tricky and as messy as it may have been, it is also about ensuring that you buy a mandate from everybody in this country. You're not just governing people who voted for you, you're also, in anticipation of those who will vote for you, you're governing people who live and reside in this country right now. Not all of whom are ANC members. Remember that the ANC has just under 2/3, but there's just over 1/3 of people who are not ANC. What about them? So I think it's not enough to say that you're biding time, because if you're the president of the Republic, then all the people of the Republic need to have confidence in the decisions that you make, the policy direction that you're taking, the redistribution mechanisms that you're putting in place, including in a cabinet reshuffle, the redistribution of power, of ideas, of policy framing, of action, and so on.
The ANC, when it has its everyday factions and fights and contestations, they love saying nobody is bigger than the ANC. And in fact, the previous president invited the wrath of the nation and many commentators like myself when he said that the ANC is more important than the country. And he elaborated when he was challenged and saying that, well, obviously without the ANC you can't have a country. And then of course our heads were spinning, but never mind that, that's the past. But is it the past? Because to what extent do these decisions at executive levels reflect the politics of the ANC, that we are prisoners of what goes on in the ANC? So here we are as a country with a constitutional court that has made certain pronouncements about certain ministers, notably Bathabile Dlamini. You would think that at the executive level, there would be a reflection in these reshuffles that the constitution is sacrosanct. So the story of this reshuffle for me lies in who didn't get the chop. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there should have been some chopping, and that did not happen. But one may also argue that it is those people who are seen to have particular constituencies that got to be retained, as it were. Yet at the same time, there's this thing about leadership that talks of personal integrity. Yeah, and my sense is that even those people who have been retained, who should not have been retained, at some point need to be able to get to, when I go to sleep, to actually feel like I've served the country the way I did, I was supposed to. In fact, when I swore that I am going to honor the Constitution, did I live up to that? And if that is not happening, there's a problem. Because to a large extent, those that we have elected into positions of authority, we look up to them to honor us as the citizens of the country. We are the shareholders. This is South Africa Incorporated. And South Africa Incorporated needs to be looked after very, very well. And it needs steady hands on the steering wheel.
Lebohang, I know you're just dying to come in here. We have to take a break because it's a very, very important theme. And we will come back to that. Hold that thought. I'm coming to you in a moment. We'll continue with this conversation after the break. Stay with us.
In making these changes, I remain determined that the cabinet of our nation should have what I would call an appropriate mix.
I, Stella Ndabeni Abrahams, swear that I will be faithful to the Republic of South Africa, so help me God.
Meet perfection, surrounded by more perfection. Surrounded by friends, on a perfect day. Make your most festive Shisanyama more festive with a 750ml black and white blended Scotch whisky for only $132.99, only from Tops at Spa.
The great bank heist.
It was brazen. It was quick.
One thought we're perhaps looking at figures much, much lower. Right. It's almost 2 billion.
It was shared amongst very greedy VBS executives and politically connected individuals. You are listed in that report. Did you steal money?
The narrative that they're trying to create is proven wrong by Advocate Mtao's report himself. He said in point 59 that he could not find a definitive wrongdoing, anything factually.
The misleading information which Daily Maverick has is deliberate. It's part of the whole propaganda machinery. You can challenge this Fanvik to bring us the so-called evidence that I received 10 million. It's pure insanity.
Is there any prospect whatsoever of saving VBS?
We are not as confident as we were when we started the curatorship as to restoring the bank.
The bank is in a hopeless situation and it cannot be saved.
Launched in 2002, the continental body is undergoing reform.
The goal is simple: to make Africa stronger and give our people the future they deserve.
Will this make the AU effective? Watch African Perspective on Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Central African Time on SABC News, Channel 404.
Welcome back. You are watching Unfiltered, and you too can be a part of this conversation on Facebook and Twitter using hashtag SABC News Unfiltered. Now, we're asking the question tonight: was this a survivalist cabinet reshuffle where political considerations trumped the rule of law? And that is our discussion today. And we just continue. I could see that before we broke to the last segment, you were just ready to jump in. Here's the thing: integrity, leadership. You're supposed to make the right decision no matter the consequences. You're supposed to be tough and make the difficult decisions. But is it fair to judge the president harshly in this regard? What do you do with somebody who has flouted the law, with somebody who has failed to demonstrate acumen for their sector and their department, and there are many that I can think of? But in the ANC, they are senior, they've got a constituency, they campaign, they throw themselves heart and soul. Nomvula Mokonyane is known for just hitting that campaign trail and putting the ANC ahead. What do you do with people like that?
So I think because we're often fallible, and my point of departure is slightly different to my colleagues, which is that not everybody will wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat considering their wrongdoing, or considering the paucity of their performance, or considering that they perhaps have been ill-advised in their course of action. And this is why we have mechanisms such as, mechanisms such as the law, integrity committees, ethical codes of conduct, and so forth, in Parliament, within the state, within the NEC, for parliamentary officials, and within the party as well. And there's a lack of convergence, of any of these instruments. But secondly, they're treated as nice to haves. And in many countries, for far less, people will resign. I mean,
we don't have that culture here.
We haven't. Yeah. And then, of course, bearing in mind, and I'm very mindful that the political context of many African countries is very different. This is not Sweden, okay? This is not UK, this is not Germany. So I get that very clearly. But nevertheless, we need to develop we need to be better, because we are better. We need to be able to put in effect the sorts of politics that say that there are consequences for flaunting the wishes of the people, public resources, public hope, public trust. And because we're not going to necessarily wake up in the middle of the night and do it automatically, certain systems and practices must come into play. You mess up, you're warned, you mess up again, you're fired. But for example, if you do lie under oath, why should we continue to trust you with the public purse, with public perceptions, with public decisions? Why should we continue to trust you to work in our interests and to act in our interests?
But again, I agree with you, by the way. I agree with you. But this is the party that was once led by a man who was said to have violated the Constitution. And his comrades were up and about saying, well, the Concord said he didn't exercise a serious violation. I mean, there was no such qualifier. He violated the Constitution. So if it was tolerated at that highest level, then why should someone like Bathabile, I mean, there's a president, basically. Exactly. She can turn around and say, no, but we supported our president when this happened. Why must I now be purged? And I read also in today's newspapers, one newspaper was reporting that when there was a debate around Bathabile Dlamini, apparently, within the ANC, that the counter-argument, the message of support was that the courts didn't say fire her. The Concord didn't say fire her. They simply said that, she must be investigated for perjury. She was negligent. She was reckless. Never mind that 17 million South Africans rely on grants in South Africa. So it's a life and death. It was a life and death situation for so many at that time. But just your thoughts on that and around how the reshuffle reflects the ruling party's concept of constitutionalism and the Constitution itself.
Well, maybe before I talk to Constitution, I would like to be able to say there are at least 4 other things that need to be in place for us to be able to have the trust necessary on our leadership. One, we need to be able to have the character that we can count on. If we don't have people whose integrity is unquestioned, whose intentions are very clear, we have a problem. Second, we need to be able to have highly competent people who have demonstrated in the time that we've had. We're on the 5th administration now. Therefore, there is all the reason to be able to seek out those who have demonstrated competence in doing what they have been mandated to be able to do. Third thing that's very critical is the courage of leadership. to be able to make decisions that are not just about popularity, not about waiting for another day. No one knows what the next 60 days are going to present to us. Decisions that are made today have a huge impact on what happens on the 1st of January 2019.
I'm not sure I'm satisfied with the answer around what do you do with that loyal cadre of the ANC. I'm going to take Ace Magashule, for example. We know that Thabo Mbeki bypassed him for the premiership of the Free State year in and year out, one term after another, even though he was chairman of the ANC in the Free State. He became a premier under Zuma, and we know that there's a trail of destruction behind him. But then he became the Secretary General of the ANC. So what I'm saying is, to what extent does this also talk about our electoral system, the power invested in a political party? For example, the DA is having its own debate around a chief whip who doesn't even have a degree, and people are having a field day, attacking, criticizing the DA for that. What should be the criteria? Can we agree as a country on the criteria required for leadership at the executive level? There's very little that we can do about a political party. Political party branches will vote in whoever they want. But how should we approach such people now being bequeathed to us as a nation? What conversation should we be having about that?
So is it about the people who are bequeathed, or is it about the principles that are bequeathed to us and the principles that we need to set as people? We're often told that we get the leadership that we deserve, and if that's the case, then we all need to go home and rethink ourselves and stare at ourselves in the mirror in the middle of the night, as Vuyani suggests, and reflect back what we want to be. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, reshuffles and politics are really about that. They're about deploying power and deploying authority and anticipating in many times intra-party politics. And that's really what has, unfortunately, that's only one component of reshuffling. And, I talked about redistributing power and redistributing assets. It's also about redistributing a set of values, ideally. And we haven't really been able to do that because we've been so focused. It has been survivalist politics. It is certainly a survivalist shuffle, very cosmetic, a bit of this and that, but nothing really fundamental. And yet, if it were not a survivalist reshuffle, number one, several of the people who we've discussed would no longer be there. But secondly, we would also be feeling a lot more satisfied as people, as South Africans, that the people who are said to be representing us also represent and reflect the best of us back to ourselves. We would know that there are consequences for wrongdoing. And the thing with this is, Ridi and Vuyani, is that, of course, this is a culture that leaks downwards. So when we have a lack of a poor ethical compass at the very top, of course it leaks. I mean, by the time it gets to the dude who's the traffic cop who stops you and asks you for a cold drink, what high ground does he have to stop you? Because it's like, yeah, even you, Luena. And these things have become an endemic culture of non-accountability, of no consequences, of just reshuffling problems or deploying problems, turning them into, DGs and disappearing them, and then they, reappear as municipal managers, a couple of, after Mail and Guardian has stopped talking about it and that kind of thing. And what does this do to our morale as people, as ordinary people? So why must I work hard in my job? Why must I make an effort? Why must I turn up to work on time when, it clearly diligence and ethics and honesty and hard work are not the criteria for promotion?
Indeed. It pains me to ask this question because we often get told that we have this progressive constitution, and I reached a point where one law after another was being violated, one court ruling after another was being ignored, thinking, what is the value of this progressive constitution if it doesn't protect us against delinquents who are actually abusing us in the manner in which you have described? You'd want political parties, all of them, to protect us from their known delinquents. I've often spoken to political leaders who will give you the history of one minister or one comrade or one official who was known to have done ABC in exile or done... So if you know that about him, so why did you allow him as a party to get that far? So all I'm saying here is this, that I would have wanted our constitution to be the final equalizer and arbiter. It is designed to be that, but the political party has the autonomy to choose what it does with its people. So it begs the question then about the systems in political parties themselves. They've got the integrity committee. There are different layers within political parties that are supposed to ensure that its delinquents are disciplined accordingly. That doesn't happen. So that's a tick and a nice to have, not working. The institutions of political parties themselves. Your thoughts?
It's quite unfortunate that that is the situation. But what it calls on, though, is for us as the citizens to rise up, to be able to challenge what's at play. Because to a large extent, the president is the president of the country, not of the party. As much as he was given the mandate in December last year, he is there now representing the whole country.
But he's clever, he's suave. He knows that the power lies in the party and not the people because we don't vote directly for him, or does that is not relevant at all?
But he does need to be able to have new membership, new votes coming in. And that's the 1/3 that Lebo was speaking about earlier on, that have not been voting for the ANC. And it is necessary to be able to look into how do I appeal to those by demonstrating leadership for the country that says I'm putting country first. And that's a critical thing for us to be able to pay attention. You see, the fourth C that I wanted to be able to raise in there was the issue of connection. Many people are in various roles but are not connected to what's happening to their own constituency. They're not connected to the people on the ground and not connected to the issues around. You know, for the last 10 years, we've been talking about the business world as all VUCA. We're talking about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Now, what on the 22nd we had was the issue of complexity and ambiguity. And essentially what you had was the president was finding himself needing to be able to deal with the 5 generations and responding to those, while at the same time addressing the promises that he made when he came in post-Valentine's Day, you know, to address us as a nation, and got the support of other leaders of the opposition parties. Now, there's a complexity around that. How do I actually still pull them to be able to work with me? And then there's the ambiguity that is at play, which has to do with I'm part of BRICS. And in BRICS, there are things that I'm doing that are needing to be able to give confidence to the others. The C in BRICS. There are many
partners and stakeholders.
And the C in BRICS is China. And when you think about how those who get to be in the senior roles have gone through various levels, local government, district government, and then metros and all of those, and you're not getting that in this particular situation. The CEO of South Africa Incorporated has the responsibility of being able to go above those and communicate to the nation. We need you to back us because we have the next 5 years in mind.
Okay, Lebu, I think you have bad luck because every time I want to come to you, it's time for an ad break. I'm coming back to you in just a moment. Let's take a short break. Now, when we return, we will be joined by SANEF's Executive Director at the South African National Editors Forum. Kate Skinner will be joining our conversation. Stay with us.
In making these changes, I remain determined that the cabinet of our nation should have what I would call an appropriate mix.
I, Stella Ndabeni Abrahams, swear that I will be faithful to the Republic of South Africa, so help me God.
Launched in 2002, the Continental Body is undergoing reform.
The goal is simple: to make Africa stronger and give our people the future they deserve.
Will this make the AU effective? Watch African Perspective on Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Central African Time on SABC News, Channel 404.
SABC is independent and impartial, and it's important that as we deliver the news, we do so without fear, without favour, without prejudice, and that we ensure that we get the multiplicity of views so that our stories and coverage is balanced.
We pride ourselves on being impartial as well as independent. On the agenda, we basically break down the stories of the day, give it more substance and give it more detail. So all in all, we basically take the news agenda of the day forward.
But more than that, we'll be able to reflect the stories of ordinary folk, people who are trying to make ends meet, facing the most incredibly difficult obstacles and circumstances, and that they will find that their realities are expressed on the SABC.
To be a part of something like this makes me proud, and I think that to be able to report the news in a fair, just, independent and impartial way is what the public broadcaster stands for.
Welcome back. You are watching Unfiltered, and it's a pleasure to be with you. We are talking about the recent cabinet reshuffle, although I think my panelists agree that there was no reshuffle. Whatever it was, that's what we are talking about, whether it's filling up empty vacancies or whatever it was. What is the impact thereof, and where does this whole move locate the importance or sanctity of our Constitution? Let me remind you that my guests this evening, Senior Research Fellow at Trade Collective, we have Lebohang Peku, we have Buyani Zwane, who's a Senior Lecturer at Gibbs. He's also the CEO of Breakthrough Development. They've been with me in the first segment of the show. But right now, I would like to introduce you to our next guest, Kate Skinner, who is the Executive Director of the South African National Editors Forum. You know, you journalists, you can create such a hype about something that's going to happen. I think you got used to the midnight cabinet reshuffles and you thought this one would be the grand scale. And when people were disappointed with the expectations you created as the media, you had no answer. What do you say?
Well, actually, can I just put something maybe slightly controversial on the table? I actually think the fact that they were merging communications and telecommunications and postal was quite significant. Because if we look at the issues around policy and the fact that we had this mad splitting of the department. We had this ICT policy on the table, which was then the two departments were split. It created absolute chaos. It created total chaos with DTT, digital terrestrial television, and the whole migration process. And the fact that our president has put those two departments back together, I actually think is significant, and I actually do think that that is a very positive move.
And it also helps that it's not somebody who has state security before. I can't help thinking about history. That Siyabonga Cwele, I remember at some point he wanted to give police and soldiers power to classify or declassify information. Now, can you imagine with Marikana that police could just go ahead and decide what we get to see and what we don't see? And I remember that he wanted to see the inclusion of the clause to the Protection of State Information Bill that will override, that would see it override the constitutionality mandated by the Promotion of Access to Information Act. So definitely a secret and spies man, and so there's
secrecy bill kind of person.
So there's huge relief that you've got Stella and Ndabeni Abrahams. But, I'm very cautious. I always think that after our conversation, that many demonstrate that their party comes first. And it's not just the ANC, opposition parties as well. They demonstrate over and over again that their party comes first and then the rest of us later. I left you hanging the last time.
It's okay.
Left you hanging the last time. We're talking about the Constitution. And how we take it forward, how we embrace it. But there is something that you touched on that was so important, Buyani. It was about people's power. It was about people rising up. Often South Africans will say, the power of the ballot, but what is the point? If somebody's watching us now and saying, I'm a spectator in what's happening in my country, how do we make this Constitution live? How do we make the president listen to the outcry over the performance of some of his ministers?
The one thing is, just to pick up on what we were talking about before, is also that you mentioned the ANC versus the Constitution. The Constitution comes first. By the
It
way,
should.
it does.
It does.
Whether or not it should, it
Okay,
does.
I
Whether or not
understand what you
whether
mean.
it's in practice, but it does. So that's the first thing. And all political parties, opposition, the governing party, are subject to that. The second thing is the Constitution is a living and alive document, and it should ideally be a dynamic reflection of ourselves. And it's a configuration or amalgamation of our values, our aspirations, and all of these nice, lovely things to have. And also to touch on what Vriani was talking about, the BRICS and all of this thing. When we have a lack of stability and a deviation from constitutional sanctity, and treating it as sacrosanct and all of the things that are deemed as important. It does a few things. What it has done is to erode South Africa's standing internationally. It has eroded our democratic and our moral voice, and ethical voice. It has also diminished our footprint in relation to different human rights or international relations and domestic relations, and regional power bases. Why? Our policies are inconsistent. There is a reshuffle and a moving around of people.
Institutional memory is lost.
Discontinuity, institutional memory, conversational memory, relational memory. Remember that ministers also relate to each other. So the minister, you're talking about China, Vuyani. So the Minister of Foreign Affairs or Finance will also be relating to, the chaps in Brazil, chaps in Russia, and so on. And so we lose not only a local footprint, but also an international and a regional footprint. And one of the legacies of the previous administration, the Mbeki administration, was a much stronger foreign affairs, the diplomatic footprint, the peace dividend, and all of these nice ideas around NEPAD for what it was and wasn't worth, but certainly it's there, it stands.
But Buyani, just on that, I think it's very important what Lebohang has just touched on. We've just seen South Africa's position on the Rohingya situation, Myanmar, and all of that. And then there was a huge about turn. And I posted on social media that if we knew what we stood for, if we knew who we were, these decisions on big things would not be so overwhelming. They'd be simple.
They would be.
They would be simple. And my sense is that a cabinet reshuffle must reflect what our vision is, what our values are. And when I look at some of the names there, I don't see that.
Well, the story of leadership in itself is that every occasion affords you the chance to put a stamp onto who you are and what it is that others can look forward to in future. It's easier to be able to be steady all the time and play to a particular constituency. But there's a necessity to be able to take unpopular decisions sometimes. I mean, we look back to Madiba. His ability to be able to, even as we're heading towards 1995, to be able to say we will retain Springbok, even though it was something that from the federation point of view we did not like. He maintained that because he understood something that was bigger in terms of culture, in terms of how it impacts on the soul of the nation. It is critical right now to be able to convey a message internationally that we know who we are. The key challenge that we've been facing, Lebohang, is that we have many policies, but we don't even implement our own policies. And that's a critical challenge. If we do not execute, it's a nice idea. You guys have been dreaming. You've just had another Lekgotla and you've come up with some ideas. What is important is to be able to demonstrate execution, an execution that is followed by accountability which is followed by consequences. If those are not in place, we're wasting our time.
Has the president demonstrated his weakness? Is he weak or merely tactical? Your thoughts?
So I would say that he, I think he's been tactical. I have to say that, this is before the elections. I think he's going to do more decisive things post the elections when he's in a more powerful position. I have to say, if you look particularly at communications, I mean, there has been such unbelievable instability in terms of all the different ministers that have come in. It has created unbelievable chaos. And in some ways, the fact that there hasn't been a major reshuffle, you can also look at it in terms of the fact that that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, obviously there are certain people that you want to get rid of, but the fact that you are not unnecessarily shaking everything up, which is what we had continuously under President Zuma, you know, I mean, that wasn't a good thing. And certainly for particular departments, again, if I can use that particular example, it was a disaster having that level of shuffling and reshuffling.
I want to talk when we come back about how the media covers or reports on cabinet decisions, on some of the ministers and on some of the politicians. Do we as the media inadvertently make heroes of certain people? And then when stuff hits the fan, as we've seen in the last couple of days, we write and comment as though we don't know where it all started. We'll talk about it in just a moment. Stay with us on Unfiltered.
Launched in 2002, the Continental Body is undergoing reform.
The goal is simple: to make Africa stronger and give our people the future they deserve.
Will this make the AU effective? Watch African Perspective on Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Central African Time on SABC News, Channel 404.
Meet perfection, surrounded by more perfection, on a perfect day. Make your most festive Shisanyama more festive with a 750ml bottle of Gordon's London Dry Gin and 1 litre Schweppes Tonic Zero combo for only $136.99. Only from Tops at Spar.
To be a part of something like this makes me proud. And I think that to be able to report the news in a fair, just, independent and impartial way is what the public broadcaster stands for. To be a part of something like this makes me proud. And I think that to be able to report the news in a fair, just, independent and impartial way is what the public broadcaster stands for.
We are in the 4th Industrial Revolution. Things aren't the same anymore. Technology is taking over much of what we do. That includes how we make payments.
Blockchain is the future.
On Network, we have robots, hackathons, and tech entrepreneurs.
Making sure that your business is well known across all borders. We use social media.
That's Network with me, Spumelele Zondi, on Saturdays at 20:30 and Sundays at 17:30.
Fashion, travel, music, food, and food. Did I mention food?
We at Trends Travel love bringing you cuisines from around the world.
Forbes US have declared Gaborone the coolest city destination to visit in the world for 2018-2019.
You know, as designers, we're always setting trends and also doing like high fashion. So it was quite nice to come and see the ready-to-wears every day.
In making these changes, I remain determined that the cabinet of our nation should have what I would call an appropriate mix.
I, Stella Ndabeni Abrahams, swear that I will be faithful to the Republic of South Africa, so help me God.
Welcome back and thank you very much for staying with us. This is Unfiltered. I'm Ridi Klabi and our guests this evening, Lebohang Pheko, a senior research fellow at Trade Collective. We have Buyani Zwani, a senior lecturer at Gibbs, and he's also the CEO of Breakthrough Development. And of course, earlier on, SANEF's executive director, Kate Skinner, also joined us. Okay, I have to do this very, very quickly, Kate. Just changing course a bit, but it's part of our political landscape and the role that the media plays. Often when certain ministers are being censored, they argue that there is trial by the media. There are instances where they are blatantly wrong, because when the Constitutional Court has ruled against you, that's where the trial was, as it were, not by the media. But I watched at the Zondo Commission how a certain television platform crossed live to a politician who was protesting and mouthing off and making allegations. Fair enough, do that. But as you return to the studio, to the reporter, you've got to contextualize those allegations, measure them up against known facts and history and pattern, but none of that happens. And then the same media houses will complain when certain politicians are attacking them. Julius Malema, for example, SANEF is taking exception with the way that he is speaking to and speaking about journalists who are reporting on the EFF and writing about the EFF. Many people say they're a 6% party. Why are you giving them so much attention when they say outrageous things, entertaining things, or are those things entertaining? That's a debate for another day.
Debate, yeah.
But you would go there because there is a caricature of sort. It's the most dramatic commentary. It will probably get you the ratings or the clicks or whatever it is that happens online these days. But then when the daggers are facing you as the media, you can't take the heat. What is your problem?
So I think that you're correct in saying that, you know, it is a problem to give certain people a huge amount of airtime when, you know, in fact, as you're saying, they don't necessarily have that kind of support. So I agree with you. And I think that that was a very big debate that we were actually having within SANEF this weekend, because we had a big council meeting, and that was precisely the issue that was put on the table.
But it's happened before, that's the thing, because I remember I was a radio talk show host, and listeners would phone and say, don't give him so much airtime. I said, well, he's the president of the ANC Youth League. The context was quite different. The constituency was big. It doesn't mean that you mustn't exercise ethical journalism, filters, for example, editorializing, contextualizing correctly. But what I'm getting at here is that there are editorials that we woke up to this morning writing about Julius Malema and other politicians as though they are not known to us, that they're demonstrating some new attributes and behaviors that we never encountered before. And I think it's the media's fault.
So I mean, I think absolutely. I mean, I think the fact is the media, you know, is definitely not above criticism. And I think that you're correct that in this kind of mad world where you know, clicks and those kinds of things are very important, and that's where we make our money, that, you know, there is this issue around the fact that, you know, there is a kind of, you know, this is a person that is saying outrageous things, and because you're saying outrageous things, you get a lot of coverage. I think the media is very aware of that, and I think there's something that we're trying to deal with. So I think that there's something, you know, important about you putting that on the table, and it's not that we're unaware of that. And I think that it is true to say that we do get very upset when particular journalists, for instance, are named. And so one of the things that we were sort of saying is that, you know, in terms of all politicians, the thing which is particularly dangerous is when you start to talk about individuals, when you start to name particular journalists and say, you know,
so there's a singling out.
There's a singling out that becomes particularly dangerous. And I think that was one of the points that SANEF was putting forward, was to say, you know, again, you know, we were saying the media is not above criticism, you know, and Julius Malema himself was making the point, you know, sometimes you put in there particular biases in the media, the particular stories that are put across and other ones are not, and particular questions are maybe not asked. All of those things are true, but the thing which becomes exceptionally dangerous is when you start to name particular people, and that was what we were saying. And because what happens is that, you know, it was interesting. So outside the Zondo Commission, he named particular people, and then he kind of pulled back and he said, but we must deal with these particular people in a civilized way.
And then there was the Stratcom matter, and we know that the economics editor of the SABC has taken court action after being called Stratcom, and then the EFF turned around and said, well, we didn't call them Stratcom, we were quoting someone else who called them Stratcom. But just very quickly on the media thing, making the same point around how the media reports on the administration of Cyril Ramaphosa. Is the media putting enough scrutiny and zoning in on the granular details? For example, that investment gathering that happened a couple of weeks ago, it turned out that a whole lot of the announcements were pledges that were made previously, but they come back, they are repackaged, and then the media reports these glowing and beautiful headlines. I'm not saying that we need to be pessimistic, that we don't give credit where credit is due, but there is something creeping in that there was a particular way of reporting on the Jacob Zuma presidency, and I think it deserved all that criticism, don't get me wrong.
Yes, yes.
And however, dropping the ball and being soldiers of Ramaphosa when our job is to scrutinize him and say, you talked big about reducing the size of your cabinet. You had a chance. Why are you waiting for the election? Reduce it now. What's Batabile Dlamini doing? Okay, that has happened. But reporting on Ramaphosa, what's the media doing?
Yeah. So I mean, I would take a slightly different perspective from you
Go
on that.
for it.
Because, I mean, my sense would be that I don't think that President Ramaphosa has had a particularly easy time. I mean, I think initially he did, and there was a sense of a huge sigh of relief around the fact that, when President Zuma left.
We can't do worse than that. That's
we
my
couldn't
position,
do worse than that. And I think the fact is that actually, to be honest, I think the general public needed a sense of like relief, a sense of like, actually, this is new. Let us be hopeful. Let us not immediately put daggers in before we've even seen what he's going to do. But I wouldn't say that he's had a completely easy run. I don't. I mean, I think a lot of people have been very critical of him, and even in terms of this particular discussion that we're having now, people sort of saying, well, actually, there was no change. It was not even a shuffle, and yet I would say, well, you could actually say that taking those two absolutely critical departments, post and telecommunications and communications. Putting them all together.
Yes.
Sorry, postal and putting them
Long
together.
titles. We know what you're
titles that
talking
get
about.
confusing. But putting them together is significant because ICT is significant in terms of our digital, policies.
Yeah.
And so I think that yes, we could do more. The media can always do more. But to say that the media hasn't been at all critical, I don't think would be correct.
Okay, and of course, one has to add there that, one doesn't advocate being critical of the president for the sake of it. It's got to be based on empirical evidence, information, and his behavior and actions, just like the politicians who on the other side argue that there's trial by media. But when you look at the record, a department that is badly run, high staff turnover, money that cannot be accounted for, as we hear over and over again from the Auditor General. So the criticism must be based on known and real facts. Stay with us. We're back in a moment.
Travel, music, food, and food. Did I mention food?
We at Trends Travel love bringing you cuisines from around the world.
Forbes US have declared Gabonese the coolest city destination to visit in the world for 2018-2019.
As designers, we're always setting trends and also doing like high fashion. So it was quite nice to come and see the ready-to-wears every day.
To be a part of something like this makes me proud. And I think that to be able to report the news in a fair, just, independent and impartial way is what the public broadcaster stands for.
Fashion, travel, music, food, and food. Did I mention food?
We at Trends Travel love bringing you cuisines from around the world.
Forbes US have declared Gabonese the coolest city destination to visit in the world for 2018-2019.
As designers, we're always setting trends and also doing like high fashion. So it was quite nice to come and see the ready-to-wears every day.
Launched in 2002, the Continental Body is undergoing reform.
The goal is simple: to make Africa stronger and give our people the future they deserve.
Will this make the AU effective? Watch African Perspective on Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Central African Time on SABC News, Channel 404.
Welcome back. You are watching Unfiltered. This is the final segment of the program, and we still have so much to say before we conclude our discussion. Let me remind you, we've got Kate Skinner, we've got Buyani Zwani, and we've got Lebohang Pheko. Okay, never mind what did and didn't happen in that reshuffle key. The fact of the matter is that we're going into an election year. All indications are that there will be a new administration, a new cabinet. What should it look like? Who must he drop? Not even if it's not individuals, but just the ideas that he must incorporate in the next administration. Lebohang, what do you think?
Okay, so we need to go back to what intergenerational means, deploying new ideas, deploying new perspectives, deploying multiple societal aspirations. So that's not just about age, that's not just about gender. I mean, that's really flat and unnuanced. It's also about the quality of leadership, the quality of ethical guidance and inspiration that they give us, and also people who bring a co-creative tension into the cabinet as well. Many countries you'll have even a bipartisan approach, even within cabinet, even within parties, because there are poles and streams within cabinet. We're not getting enough of a reflection of that here at all. We're just not getting that, and we're not getting a sense of people who perhaps are more forward-looking, the people who might be more hawkish, the people who might have a more liberal view on particular perspectives. It's all about this inward-looking ANCification of what should be state affairs.
Is it a problem that a lot of our political figures who are at executive level have done nothing else but be politicians? I wonder whether that narrows their worldview and experience somehow, that they haven't done other amazing things elsewhere.
But isn't that also about then getting people who come from different sectors of society, civil society, trade unions, the corporates, and so forth? Isn't it academia? Isn't it exactly what we're supposed to be seeing? And also, we're supposed to be transitioning out of Liberation Party politics. Yeah. That's not just a South Africa thing. That's an across the continent thing.
I can't remember which country. For the life of me, I could kick myself. Just 2 weeks ago, it was in the news because the incoming president advertised posts for cabinet positions. People had to apply for certain ministries. How delicious is that?
I think what is going to be necessary is better coordination between ministries. We've had what has just happened now, and we're happy with one element, getting communications, getting postal services and all of those together. But when you think about it, small business and economic development need to be working together. They are dealing with the same stakeholder base, and they are out there to be able to ensure we've got entrepreneurial culture built into the nation. When you are sitting with 1 out of every 2 youth unemployed, that's a powder keg waiting to be able to explode anytime. That is not a good thing to be able to have. And also we need to have better coordination between government departments. Here we are on the 22nd, we are getting to be told about the reshuffle key, as you point to it. But just the day before then, we have the opening up of the bridge between South Africa and Mozambique. And in itself, it resurrects the previous administration. There's a lot of celebration that comes through around the previous administration, just as the new administration or president is about to be able to articulate what needs to be there. On the 25th and 26th of August, the president had a biodiversity innovation conference, which was to be able to begin to talk to how we could get the most out of tourism, working together with environmental affairs. And in that process, drew in Dr. DLR. In that sense, you're beginning to find a cluster that could work together to address the land issue and also look into it in terms of how we talk about tourism as one of the easiest ways of being able to create employment and less capital investment necessary around that. That is something that needs to be addressed.
All right. We're running out of time then, very quickly.
Well, I mean, the security cluster needs attention. You now have the Home Affairs led by a former intelligence person. Something needs to be done around that space.
Kate?
Yeah, so more streamlined, more efficient. I mean, probably much fewer deputy ministers. I mean, I'm not sure.
Oh, yes, to that.
So where there's just no need for a particular person and not to have those particular people. But I want to make a quick point.
Quick?
Okay, it's just in terms of this particular elections and making sure that leaders actually do protect the Constitution. They protect the Constitution, and part of that they protect access to information, freedom of expression, and that they don't allow us to have the space where there's actually, journalists, for instance, are actually attacked, and also that they're like no-go areas where certain people cannot actually go into those areas.
Yes, I saw that the Minister Batabile Dlamini, that was the allegation.
Exactly.
That the NCA could not broadcast.
Could not broadcast.
So that's a fact. That really happened.
That's a fact. And then, for instance, the latest thing was Julius Malema said the Sunday Times cannot send journalists to his press conferences.
His press conferences.
So I'm saying those no-go areas and no-go topics, we have to have all of that covered because
we have to leave it there. Kate Skinner, Lebohang Peku, and Buyani Zwane, I've so loved chatting to you, and I hope that I will have this exact same panel after the elections next year. We'll pick up where we left off. Remember, this is a big week politically. The ANC is appearing before the Zondo Commission, so there's a lot to talk about there. That's all we had time for this evening. Thank you very much for joining Unfiltered. Until we meet again next Sunday at 9 p.m. Take good care and good night.